The night was supposed to be quiet, just another routine patrol for the two officers. But when they saw a black woman walking alone near the woods, they decided to have some fun. A cruel, twisted kind of fun. With smirks on their faces, they grabbed her, dragged her to a tree, and tied her up, laughing at her fear. To them, she was just another helpless victim, someone they could intimidate without consequences. But what they didn't know was that this woman wasn't just anybody. Her husband was one of the most powerful law enforcement officials in the country, the director of the FBI. And when he found out what had happened, everything changed. The officers who thought they were untouchable were about to learn a lesson they'd never forget. Stay tuned as we unravel this shocking story of abuse, power, and the unexpected twist that turned the tables. The woman's heart pounded as she struggled against the ropes digging into her wrists. The cold night air sent a chill down her spine, but it was nothing compared to the fear creeping through her. The officers stood nearby, chuckling, completely unaware of who she was. To them, she was just another person they could intimidate, another name that wouldn't matter. Hours passed, and the woman remained silent, refusing to give them the reaction they wanted. But inside, she was already thinking ahead. She knew her husband would be looking for her. He wasn't just a man with connections. He was the FBI director, a man who had spent his career hunting down criminals, exposing corruption, and ensuring justice. Back at home, he was beginning to worry. His wife never stayed out this late without calling. Something was wrong. And when he started digging for answers, the officer's fate was already sealed. As the hours passed, the woman remained calm on the outside, but inside, her mind was racing. She knew these officers saw her as powerless, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. Every second that ticked by brought her husband closer to finding her, and when he did, there would be consequences. Back at home, the FBI director was growing restless. He had called her phone multiple times, no answer. His instincts told him something was wrong. He made a few calls, tracing her last known location. When he found out she had been near the wooded area outside of town, his gut tightened. Something didn't add up. He immediately activated his resources, sending agents to track her down. Meanwhile, the officers continued to joke among themselves, unaware that their so-called prank was about to explode into a national scandal. The power they thought they had was slipping away, and they didn't even know it yet. The sound of distant sirens cut through the night, faint but growing louder. The woman lifted her head slightly, her pulse quickening. Help was coming, but the officers remained oblivious, still laughing, still believing they were untouchable. One of them casually leaned against a patrol car, scrolling through his phone, while the other took a sip of coffee, as if this was just another uneventful night. At that moment, the FBI director sat in the back of a black SUV speeding toward the location. His face was emotionless, but his mind was racing. He had spent years tracking criminals, breaking up organized crime, bringing justice to those who thought they were above the law. But tonight was different. Tonight was personal. His wife's life was in danger, and the men responsible had no idea that their time was running out. As the sirens grew closer, the officers finally noticed. Their smiles faded. Something was wrong. The officers exchanged uneasy glances as the sirens grew louder. One of them stepped forward, trying to act casual, but his hand instinctively moved toward his radio. "Something's up," he muttered. The other officer, now tense, looked toward the woman tied to the tree. For the first time that night, he felt a flicker of doubt. Then the headlights appeared, multiple vehicles speeding toward them. Not just squad cars, but unmarked black SUVs. The kind that didn't show up unless something serious was happening. The kind that meant someone powerful was involved. The officers stiffened. Before they could react, their radios crackled. A voice came through, sharp and authoritative. "Stand down immediately." The officers froze. That wasn't their chief. That wasn't anyone from their department. The realization hit them like a punch to the gut. Whoever was coming wasn't just here to investigate. They were here for them. And suddenly they understood. They had made a terrible mistake. The officers barely had time to react before the SUV skidded to a stop. Doors flew open, and within seconds, armed federal agents surrounded them. Flashlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the terrified expressions on their faces. One of the officers reached for his badge, trying to regain control of the situation. "We're cops," he stammered, but no one was listening. Then from the back of one of the SUVs, a man stepped out. He was calm, but his eyes burned with quiet fury. The FBI director had arrived. He didn't say a word at first. He just looked at his wife, still tied to the tree, then back at the officers. The weight of that moment crushed them. This wasn't just a mistake. This was career-ending, life-changing. Just as they thought they couldn't sink any lower, one of the agents stepped forward, holding up a file. "We ran their records," he said. "You're going to want to see this." The director took the file, flipped it open, and his expression darkened. The officers weren't just in trouble. They had secrets of their own. And now everything was about to come crashing down. The officers stood frozen as the FBI director flipped through the file. Their past wasn't as clean as they had pretended. Misconduct reports, complaints buried under paperwork, and now this, something they couldn't walk away from. Their arrogance had finally caught up with them. Without a word, the director turned to his wife. Agents quickly untied her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. She met her husband's eyes, and in that moment, no words were needed. Justice would be served. As the officers were placed in handcuffs, one of them tried to plead, but it was too late. The truth was out. What they had done in the dark had been brought into the light. The director took one last look at them before turning away. Tonight had been personal, but this was bigger than revenge. It was about accountability. And for these officers, their time had finally run out.